The moving truck rumbled away, leaving the Miller family standing in the golden hour light of a perfect late summer evening, surrounded by boxes in the cavernous entry hall of 31 Larkspur Lane. To Mark and Anna Miller, it was more than a house. It was the culmination of a decade of saving, a sanctuary for their two young children, and a promise of a fresh start. The house was a sprawling, three-story Queen and Victorian, complete with a wraparound porch, intricate gingerbread trim, and a charming, if slightly overgrown, garden. It was a steal, a fact their real estate agent had attributed to the elderly previous owner's desire for a quick sale to a young family. "It's perfect," Anna whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she squeezed Mark's hand. Their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was already spinning in the empty living room, her laughter echoing, while their 4-year-old son, Leo, clung to Anna's leg, wide-eyed at the scale of his new home. The move had been chaotic, as moves always are, but as the last box was hauled inside, Anna noticed a single, pristine envelope sitting alone on the mantelpiece. It was made of heavy, cream-colored paper, and their names, the Miller family, were written in an elegant, spidery cursive. "Must be from the previous owner," Mark said, tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of matching stationery. There was no lengthy welcome, no list of utility contacts. Just one sentence, written in the same meticulous hand. "For all our sakes, never lock the nursery door at night." They looked at each other, a shared ripple of unease passing between them. "The nursery?" Anna said, frowning. "We're using that as the playroom. It's not even a bedroom." Mark shrugged, a practical man dismissive of superstition. "Probably just an eccentric old lady. Mrs. Gable, right? Maybe she was forgetful, worried about locking a kid in by accident." He crumpled the note and tossed it into a packing paper-filled box. "Don't worry about it." But Anna did worry. The note felt less like a suggestion and more like a warning. This formality was unsettling. The first few days were a blissful whirlwind of unpacking and exploration. The house was even more wonderful than they had dreamed. Sunlight streamed through stained glass transoms, the original hardwood floors gleamed, and the floor plan was both grand and cozy. Lily claimed the large, sunny room on the second floor, while the smaller, connecting room, the designated nursery, became the children's playroom, filled with toys and books. Leo's room was across the hall. The house had its quirks, of course. The old plumbing groaned like a dying man, and the third floor, a finished attic space, was perpetually cold, a damp chill seeming to seep from the very walls. But these were minor things easily attributed to the character of an old home. The first incident was small, easy to dismiss. On their third night, Anna was woken by the sound of a music box. It was a faint, tinkling melody, a lullaby she didn't recognize, coming from upstairs. She shook Mark awake. "It's just the house settling," he mumbled, already half asleep. "Or one of the kids' toys." But when Anna crept upstairs, the playroom was dark and silent. Lily and Leo were fast asleep. The music had stopped. She wrote it off as her imagination, a product of stress and a new environment. A few nights later, Leo started waking up crying, something he hadn't done since he was a toddler. "The man in the wall is whispering," he would sob, pointing a trembling finger at the hallway outside his room. Mark, ever the rationalist, checked the vents and the attic access panel. "It's the wind, buddy. Just the wind in the old pipes." But Anna noticed the temperature. The hallway outside the playroom was always noticeably colder than the rest of the floor, a cold that seemed to cling to the skin. And she began to have a recurring dream of a tall, thin shadow standing in the doorway of the playroom, a silhouette against the night light listening. She dug the crumpled note out of the recycling. "Never lock the nursery door at night." The words now felt heavy, laden with a meaning she couldn't grasp. The dream house was beginning to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage, and the single, forgotten instruction was its only key. The idyllic facade of 31 Larkspur Lane began to crack as autumn deepened. The strange occurrences escalated from faint noises to palpable disturbances, chipping away at the family's sense of security. Leo's night terrors intensified. He wasn't just crying anymore. He was screaming, his small body rigid with a fear that seemed to transcend normal childhood nightmares. He started drawing pictures with frantic, dark scribbles. When Anna asked him what they were, he would whisper, "The thin man. He's sad. He's looking for his key." One afternoon, Anna found Lily in the playroom, having a tea party with her dolls. She was speaking in a low, conversational tone. "Yes, he's a good boy," Lily said, pouring invisible tea for a teddy bear. "He just gets lost in the walls. He wants to come out and play." A chill that had nothing to do with the room's ambient temperature crawled up Anna's spine. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" Lily looked up, her expression perfectly normal. "The boy. The one who lives in the little door." There was no little door. Anna searched the room, her heart hammering. The only door was the main one to the hallway. But Lily insisted, pointing to a blank section of wall behind the toy chest. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier. Mark, who had been dismissive, started to come around. He came home from work one evening to find every cabinet in the kitchen standing open. Another time, all the family photos on the stairs were turned face down. He tried to blame it on the kids, but the look in Anna's eyes, a mixture of fear and vindication, told him otherwise. The cold spot in the hallway intensified, now carrying a faint, sweet and sour smell, like old flowers and damp earth. Anna started having trouble sleeping, plagued by the feeling of being watched. She would lie awake, listening to the house, and sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, she would catch it. A soft, rhythmic scratching, like a fingernail on wood, coming from the other side of the playroom door. One night, driven by a desperate need for a full night's sleep, Mark did the unthinkable. "This is ridiculous," he declared, his voice tight with stress and exhaustion. "We're letting our imaginations run wild. We're locking that damn door. Maybe the draft is causing the noises." "Mark, no," Anna pleaded, the previous owner's note flashing in her mind. The note! The note was from a confused old woman. He snapped, a rare show of temper. He marched to the playroom and, with a definitive click, turned the old-fashioned skeleton key in the lock. "There. Now we can get some sleep." The house fell silent. Profoundly, unnaturally silent. The usual creaks and groans ceased entirely. It was the silence of a held breath. For a few hours it worked. The family slept. Then, at 3:03 a.m., a sound tore through the silence. A sound that froze the blood in their veins. It was a scream, but not a human one. It was a high, ragged, metallic shriek of tortured hinges, coming from directly upstairs. Mark and Anna bolted out of bed and raced into the hallway. The playroom door was still locked, but from the gap under the door, a faint, sickly green light pulsed rhythmically. And from within, they heard a new sound, the sound of a child weeping. But it wasn't Lily's cry or Leo's. It was the hopeless, desolate sob of a stranger. Mark fumbled with the key, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit it into the lock. He threw the door open. The room was ice cold. The window was closed. The night light was off. The room was exactly as they had left it, except for one thing. In the middle of the floor, where Lily had been playing, was a single, small, muddy footprint. They had broken the one rule, and whatever was in the house with them was no longer just whispering. It was awake. The morning after the locked door incident, the atmosphere in the house was thick with terror. The children were pale and clingy. Mark's rational worldview had been shattered. Anna moved through the rooms with a hunted look, jumping at every sound. The single, muddy footprint had vanished by morning, as if it had never been, which was somehow more frightening than if it had remained. "We need to find out what happened here," Anna said, her voice firm despite the fear. "We need to know who Mrs. Gable was, and why she left that note." Their investigation began at the local library's historical archives. A helpful librarian directed them to Old Town census records and newspaper archives. They found the Gable family quickly. Alistair and Eleanor Gable had owned the house since it was built in 1895. They had one son, Thomas, born in 1898. The trail went cold for a while until Anna, searching through digitized microfilm of the local newspaper, the Larkspur Ledger, found a small, heartbreaking article from October 1912. Tragedy on Larkspur Lane. The community is in mourning following the disappearance of Thomas Gable, 14, son of Alastair and Eleanor Gable of 31, Larkspur Lane. The boy, described as a quiet and sensitive child, was last seen at the family supper table on Tuesday evening. An extensive search of the woods and surrounding area has yielded no clues. Foul play is suspected. Anna felt a pang of profound sadness. A boy had vanished, but that was over a century ago. What did it have to do with them? They dug deeper, visiting the county clerk's office for property records. They discovered that after Alastair and Eleanor died in the 1950s, the house passed to a distant relative, who sold it almost immediately. It changed hands several times over the decades, never staying with one family for more than a few years. At the local historical society, an elderly volunteer, hearing their address, grew somber. "Ah, the Gable house," she said, shaking her head. "Such a sad story." The rumor, of course, was that the father, Alastair, was a stern man, a watchmaker, very precise. They say he was obsessed with order and silence. The boy, Thomas, well, they say he had a habit of sleepwalking, making noise at night, disturbing his father's peace. The pieces were starting to form a horrifying picture. Anna remembered Leo's drawings of the thin man. She remembered Lily's boy who lives in the little door. They tracked down the last known address of the previous owner, the Mrs. Gable who had sold them the house. She was in a nursing home on the outskirts of the county. Her name was Marjorie Gable, the great-niece of the original owners. The woman they met was frail, her mind sharp in flashes but clouded by age and medication. When Anna mentioned the address, her eyes widened with fear. "You live there?" she whispered, clutching her blanket. Did you read my note?" "We did," Anna said gently. "But we didn't understand. Can you tell us why? Why mustn't we lock the door?" Tears welled in the old woman's eyes. "It was great-uncle Alastair," she mumbled. "After Thomas vanished, he was consumed by guilt. He thought he'd been too harsh. That the boy had run away because he'd locked him in his room as punishment for sleepwalking. The nursery." She took a shaky breath. "But he didn't run away. He never left. After Alastair and Eleanor died, we found his journal. He believed he'd accidentally locked Thomas in a hidden panic room." Anna and Mark stared at her, stunned. "A panic room?" "The house was built just after a series of burglaries," Marjorie explained. "Alastair was a paranoid man. He had a small, secret room built off the nursery, hidden behind a wall. A safe place to hide. He wrote in his journal that he feared, in a fit of anger over the boy's noise, he had locked Thomas in there and forgotten. That the boy had suffocated. He was too ashamed to ever tell anyone. He just let them think Thomas had run away. The truth was more horrifying than any ghost story. A child had died a terrifying, lonely death trapped in a hidden room in their house. His spirit, confused and trapped, was still there. And the act of locking the nursery door, the door to his prison, was what enraged him, what gave him the strength to manifest. The instruction wasn't to protect them from something outside. It was to placate the tragedy trapped within. Armed with the devastating truth, Mark and Anna returned to 31 Larkspur Lane. The house no longer felt like their dream home. It felt like a tomb. Every creak was a sigh. Every shadow a reminder of the boy trapped in the walls. They knew what they had to do. They had to find the hidden room. They started in the playroom, the former nursery. They tapped on walls, looking for hollow spots. They moved the heavy toy chest Lily had pointed to. The one she said had the little door behind it. The wall seemed solid. For hours they searched, their frustration growing. The air in the room grew colder with each passing minute, the faint smell of decay becoming more pronounced. It was as if the house itself was resisting them. It was Lily who provided the final clue. She came into the room, holding one of her dolls. "The boy is crying again," she said quietly. "He says his daddy took the key and hid it in the clock." Mark and Anna looked at each other. The clock. In the corner of the living room stood a magnificent, floor-standing grandfather clock that had been left by the previous owners. It was broken, its hands frozen at 3:03, the exact time they had heard the door scream in the night. With trembling hands, Mark opened the clock's face. Inside, amidst the frozen gears and dusty pendulums, tucked into a hidden crevice, was a small, tarnished brass key, unlike any they had ever seen. It was ornate with a complex, angular bow. They rushed back to the nursery. They examined every inch of the wall behind the toy chest. And then Mark saw it. A hairline crack in the wallpaper, forming a perfect vertical rectangle. At its base, almost invisible, was a tiny keyhole. He inserted the key. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. A section of the wall, perfectly disguised, swung inward a few inches, releasing a wave of frigid, stale air that carried the unmistakable sweet rot stench of death. Anna gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth. Mark pushed the door open wider, shining his phone's flashlight into the darkness. The space was tiny, no larger than a broom closet. The walls were bare plaster. On the floor was a thin, moth-eaten blanket. And in the corner, curled in a fetal position, was a small, skeletal form, still dressed in the tattered remains of a nightshirt from another century. A dusty teddy bear lay nearby. Thomas Gable. He had been here all along. The grief that washed over them was immense and suffocating. This wasn't a monster. This was a child. A boy who had been frightened, punished, and tragically, accidentally, entombed by his own father. His spirit wasn't malevolent. It was desperate, lonely, and trapped in the final, terrifying moments of his life. As they stood in horrified silence, the greenish light they had seen under the door began to glow softly from within the hidden room. The air grew still, and then, a faint, translucent figure began to form in the corner of the main playroom. It was the silhouette of a tall, thin man, his head bowed in shame. Alistair Gable. The figure did not look at them. He glided towards the hidden room, his form passing through the wall. A moment later, a different figure emerged. A young boy, translucent and shimmering. Thomas. He looked at Anna and Mark, and for the first time, his expression was not one of fear or sadness, but of profound relief. The tall man's spectral hand reached out, and the boy took it. Together, the two figures faded, their light dissolving into the air like mist in sunshine. The oppressive cold in the room vanished. The heavy, watchful feeling that had plagued the house was gone. For the first time since they had moved in, 31 Larkspur Lane was just a house. Silent but peacefully so. The days that followed were somber but calm. The police were called, and the discovery of Thomas Gable's remains became a national news story. A sad, historical mystery finally solved. The official cause of death was ruled as accidental suffocation. Mark and Anna, with the support of the Historical Society and what was left of the Gable family, arranged a proper burial for Thomas in the town cemetery, next to his parents. It was a small, quiet service. As the small casket was lowered into the ground, Anna felt a final, gentle release of the tension that had gripped her for months. Back at the house, the change was palpable. The cold spots were gone. The strange noises ceased. Lily stopped talking about the boy in the walls, and Leo's night terrors ended as abruptly as they had begun. The house was filled with light and the normal, cheerful sounds of a family, unhaunted. They decided to stay. The house, they now understood, had not been evil. It had been a vessel for a sorrow that needed to be resolved. They had freed Thomas, and in doing so, they had freed their home. They converted the hidden room into a small, beautiful reading nook, with a comfortable chair, a soft lamp, and shelves filled with children's books. They didn't hide it away. They integrated it, transforming a place of death into a place of life and comfort. It was their way of honoring the boy who had once lived there. One afternoon, weeks later, Anna was in the nook, reading to Leo. She found a book she didn't recognize, an old, beautifully illustrated collection of fairy tales. Tucked inside the front cover was a photograph of a serious-looking boy with dark hair, holding a teddy bear. It was Thomas. On the back, in a child's handwriting, was written, "For the new family. Thank you." Anna smiled, a tear of bittersweet joy rolling down her cheek. The house was truly theirs now, its past finally laid to rest. The single instruction had not been a curse, but a plea, a final, desperate attempt from one family to another to prevent a tragedy from repeating itself. They had heeded it too late to avoid the terror, but just in time to perform a final act of kindness. A year passed. The Miller family thrived at 31 Larkspur Lane. The Victorian house was now filled with happy memories, birthday parties, holiday gatherings, the simple, warm chaos of a loving family. The story of Thomas Gable became a part of the house's history, a sad chapter they respectfully acknowledged but were no longer haunted by. Mark, humbled by the experience, became less rigid, more open to the unexplained mysteries of the world. Anna found a new sense of strength, trusting her instincts implicitly. The ordeal had forged their family bond into something unbreakable. One crisp autumn day, they were raking leaves in the front yard when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, their faces filled with the same hopeful excitement the Millers had once possessed. "Hello," the woman called. "We're so sorry to bother you. We're thinking of putting an offer on the house next door, and we just wanted to get a feel for the neighborhood." Anna and Mark exchanged a knowing look. They invited the couple in for lemonade, the late afternoon sun casting long, warm shadows across their restored home. As they sat in the living room, the woman glanced around, her eyes lingering on the now functional grandfather clock, its hands ticking steadily. "It's such a beautiful home," she gushed. "You're so lucky. Does it have any quirks we should know about?" Anna smiled, a gentle, peaceful smile. She walked to the mantelpiece, where a single cream-colored envelope now sat, unopened, next to a photograph of a happy family. "Every old house has its stories," Anna said, her voice soft. "And if you're lucky enough to live in one, the most important thing is to listen." She didn't tell them about the note or the hidden room or the boy named Thomas. Some stories aren't meant to be warnings for the next family. They are lessons for the one who lived them. The Millers had faced the darkness within their dream home and, with compassion and courage, had found a way to fill it with light. Their dream hadn't died. It had simply been redefined, made deeper and more real by the ghost they had laid to rest and the peace they had earned.